In the name of the Emperor, I submit this chronicle to the Ordo Malleus Archive, sealed under the sigil of thrice sanctified truth. If you are reading this, know that the veil between reality and nightmare has thinned. Know that I, archivist militant Ephrata Gaul, once a daughter of Terra, now carry the burden of memory for all who dared to look upon the celestial graveyard. The graveyard is not marked on Imperial charts. You will not find its coordinates listed among the naval routes of Segmentum Obscurus. To search for it is to risk madness. To find it is to invite death. But still it finds us. It begins with a flicker on long-range augers, a shiver in the Geller fields, a mass drifting from the warp. Slow, silent, vast. No thrusters, no power signatures, just shape, presence, a silhouette stitched together from the bones of countless lost ships. We call it a space hulk. But this one is older. It is not merely a vessel of ruin. It is a reliquary of fear. The first known contact was logged in M41.755 by the Resplendent Martyr, an ecclesiarchy pilgrim ship en route to Castorel Novum. Their last transmission was a vox canticle praising the Emperor's light, then static, punctuated by screams and the tolling of broken bells. A week later, fragments of their hull rained across the asteroid belts of the Balor system, still inscribed with blood-lit litanies. What followed was a pattern, subtle at first, freighters lost without cause, warp routes collapsing in on themselves, astropathic silence blooming like a cancer across nearby sectors. Imperial Navy cartographers began to whisper of an unmapped region, a corridor of black stars and echoing signal ghosts. The name Celestial Graveyard first appeared in the logs of Captain Lord Joran Valth of Battlefleet Cerberus, who described it as a flotilla of phantoms, the ossuary of mankind's forgotten sins. None who enter return whole. The graveyard is not a single hulk. It is many, welded and fused by the caprice of the warp, ships from the Great Crusade, their hulls still bearing the sigils of the Emperor's earliest conquests. Explorator craft lost before the rise of the ecclesiarchy. Even xenos vessels, their alien geometry barely recognizable beneath the grime of ages. And worst of all, those that flew under the banner of the traitor legions, the Iron Warriors, the Word-bearers, the Night Lords, all meshed into one impossible monstrosity. The mass is held together by an unnatural gravity, a force that does not obey the laws of physics. Some say it is the warp's breath holding it in place. Others claim a demon of vast intellect resides within its heart, knitting it like a web of war steel and sorrow. I have seen pict feeds recovered from a Mechanicus salvage team, their servitors moving through hulls that shifted behind them, corridors stretching impossibly long, rooms that looped back into themselves. One Magos explorator spoke of hearing the Ave Imperator whispered in a child's voice over his Vox link. He terminated himself with a plasma cutter 3 hours later, carving the sign of the Aquila into his chest with trembling mechadendrites. The celestial graveyard consumes identity. Ships absorbed into it lose not only their engines and crew, but their history. Data cores melt into rivets. Logs are overwritten with blasphemous prayers. One inquisitorial survey found a fragment of the Valiant Sun, a lunar-class cruiser listed as destroyed during the Siege of Terra. It had been missing for 10,000 years. On its prow was etched the name Morning Chime, in a script unknown to any Imperial dialect. But the most disturbing finding comes not from the void, but from the warp itself. Navigators passing near the region report visions, impossible ones, a shining city floating among the stars, built from basilicas of gold and silver, from ships of every era. Some see it as a paradise, others as a trap. But all agree on one thing. A throne rests at its center, and something sits upon it. Not the Emperor, The celestial graveyard does not merely drift. It hunts, slowly, patiently. Systems grow quiet in its wake. Planets begin to dream. Entire sectors become riddled with plague, mutation, heresy. It is the seed of chaos given form, a cathedral of ruin, spreading the gospel of oblivion. And every time it breaches the materium, it grows. You may ask, why not destroy it? Why not unleash the exterminatus and end this nightmare? The truth is, we have tried. Cyclonic torpedoes vanish into its mass and emerge hours later, embedded in our own vessels. Orbital fire scorches it to no effect. Even Exorcist chapter terminators sent into its heart never returned, though their death screams now loop eternally on forbidden Vox frequencies. They plead not for salvation, but for silence. What secrets lie within its depths, no one can say. Some believe it hides an artifact from the dark age of technology, a fragment of the Men of Iron's final war. Others suspect it houses a demon engine so ancient even the Dark Mechanicum fears it. And still others claim it is not a ship at all, but a broken sliver of the materium's edge, where reality has collapsed into the raw, seething madness of the immaterium. The graveyard is growing bolder. In M42.014, an Adeptus Custodes recon vessel encountered the outer edge of the hulk near the margins of Segmentum Pacificus. They did not engage, merely observed. Even they, the Emperor's golden wrath made flesh, chose not to board. Their message was simple. We found something that watches. It remembers us. We do not believe it has forgotten. I do not know if this record will survive. I do not know if I will survive. I feel its presence even now in the low hum of my ship's engines, in the flicker of cogitator screens. Sometimes I hear a voice at the edge of thought, saying my name in tones that are almost my own. The graveyard calls to all of us, eventually. There are records that no one is supposed to read, log entries that exist only in rumor, stashed behind vaults wrapped in sigils, buried in databanks that breathe beneath the surface of Mars. But even among those forbidden archives, there exists one name, scrawled in the margins of a lost treatise by Archmagos Dorlem Var, Ostensor Maledictus, the Void Titan. It was not always a curse. Once, it was a miracle. The Ostensor Maledictus began life during the twilight of the Great Crusade, when the Mechanicum still dreamed of building cities among the stars, and the Imperium's ambition knew no limit. Forged in the ship foundries of Caspus Delta, it was to be a flagship beyond compare, a beacon of mankind's glory. The design was ancient, based on scraps from STC blueprints long considered mythical. The vessel was over 20 kilometers in length, powered by a tri-core warp drive and a prototype SI reactor designed to amplify the thoughts of its command crew into real-time battle directives. They called it the Instrument of Revelation. It launched in M31.742. At its helm was Fleet Magos Carvax Sign, a man spoken of in hushed awe even by the priests of Mars. He was brilliant, certainly, but too willing to embrace the borderline, the experimental, the forbidden. Many feared him, but none dared question him. He stood on the bridge of the instrument, robes trailing like smoke, as his ship vanished into the immaterium, with a proud cry of, "Omnissiah, preserve us." That cry was the last true transmission ever received. For 11,000 years the ship was lost, its fate assumed sealed, its memory brushed into the margin of history. Some claimed the warp drive malfunctioned. Others suspected sabotage. A few whispered of betrayal from within. But the truth was more terrible than any of them knew. In M42.001, a warp anomaly blinked into existence along the edge of the Thonar expanse. Imperial probes died before reaching it. Vox relays screamed static for hours. Then, without warning, it emerged. It was the instrument, but changed. Warped, as the Lex mechanics would say. Its once lustrous hull was now a rust-scabbed patchwork of blackened gold and bleeding steel. Massive pylons jutted from its flanks like broken wings. Glyphs danced across its surface, symbols that defied translation, twisting into themselves when looked at too long. And the name, Ostensor Maledictus, pulsed in burning red across its prow. The Mechanicus wept. The Inquisition screamed. Survivors from the Sword of Allegiance, a Navy frigate tasked with intercepting the anomaly, spoke of a ship that moved like a living thing. Its hull cracked open to reveal decks within decks, miles of screaming walls and corridors lined with statues that turned their heads when not observed. Time itself collapsed inside it. Vox officers aged into corpses in minutes. Servitors spoke in reversed tongues. One astropath was found levitating, murmuring secrets of long-dead xenos empires before her body folded into a lotus of bone and glass. They escaped, but not unmarked. Each crew member bore a brand on their palm, as if burned there, a perfect cog split by a single weeping eye. The sigil has since appeared in 3 other incidents involving the Hulk. No one knows its meaning, not even the Ordo Malleus. Some say the Ostensor became aware, a nascent machine intelligence twisted by the warp. Others believe it is merely a shell now, inhabited by something far older than the Imperium, a demon of technology, or worse, a fragment of the motive force itself, broken and corrupted. But what lends the ship its second name, Void Titan, is not its size or weaponry. It is its effect. Entire fleets vanish near it. The 4th phalanx of the Phobos Guard, once 17 capital ships strong, disappeared in pursuit of the Hulk. Weeks later, a rain of command insignias fell on the shrine world of Prevena III, still warm, some bloodied. No trace of the ships was ever found. The planet of Remaris burned for a week after the Hulk passed its orbit. No fire, just screams. Millions cried out at once, bursting vessels, seizing in agony, clawing at their own shadows. When the silence came, only 98 survived. All were infants, hidden in stasis creche. Every one of them now speaks fluently in lingua technis. They were born without tongues. The Ostensor moves with no known propulsion. It appears, drifts, disappears. Every time it returns, it has changed shape slightly, like a puzzle still assembling itself. Some observers have mapped the alterations and claim the ship is building something within itself. A cathedral, a war engine, or perhaps a gate, meant not for men but for something trying to come through. There was one attempt to board it. Inquisitor Halbrecht of the Ordo Xenos commissioned a Black Templar's strike force to breach the Hulk. Records show initial success. Boarding torpedoes made contact. A beachhead was established. Auspex scans showed multiple life forms. Then the feed cut. For 12 hours, only silence. Then one of the torpedoes returned, on its own. Inside was a single Black Templar, Brother Sergeant Malthin. He was unconscious but uninjured. His armor was intact. His weapon, a chainsword known as Void Sunder, was fused into a single piece of obsidian, humming with unknown energy. When he awoke, he looked upon the Inquisitor and spoke a single phrase. "He is waking." Then he died, his body liquefying into a stream of data script that burned through 6 layers of cogitator shielding before vanishing into the noosphere. The Mechanicus have since declared the Ostensor Maledictus a perdita machina, a cursed machine. But they do not destroy their gods. And somewhere in the darker forges of Mars, there are those who believe it must be understood. The Tau Empire has declared the region around the Hulk a dead zone. The Eldar will not speak of it. The Necrons avoid it altogether. One cryptech was heard calling it a broken shard of their own folly, though no one knows what that means. Not yet. But those of us who've watched the stars long enough know this. The Ostensor is not wandering. It is circling, waiting, choosing. We have built cathedrals to the Emperor, launched crusades in his name, and scattered our arrogance across the void like shattered glass. But in the silent places between stars, where only the warp whispers, something far older watches. And it is not impressed. They called it the instrument of revelation. It was never a lie. It still reveals, not our glory, not our might, but our end. There is something uniquely cruel about false hope. When a dying ship sees salvation in the void, flares distress signals, stirs reserves of dwindling power, and turns its failing engines toward a promise that was never there. Those are the ghost lights. Most tales about space hulks speak of monstrosity, demon-haunted decks, whispering steel, forgotten heresies made manifest. But the ghost lights are not ships. Not truly. They are illusions, yes, but with substance enough to damn entire fleets. They flicker into existence near failing Geller fields, close to systems where warp storms have sat too long, where reality has begun to thread thin. You'll see them first on long-range auspex, a bright flare too clean to be debris, too angular to be an asteroid. The machine spirits will name them unknown contact, human vessel signature, sometimes even a class name, Gladius, Retribution, Endeavor. Always Imperial, always familiar, and always a lie. The first ghost light officially recorded was mistaken for a lost frigate, the gallant Solace. Segmentum Tempestus archives mark the date as M40.892. The ship had vanished a century earlier during a retreat from a Tyranid splinter fleet near Hydros 9. When an Adeptus Mechanicus patrol vessel detected the Solace drifting near the Demetros Rift, they celebrated. A recovery mission was launched. Salvage rites were prepared. Banners were flown. 6 hours after boarding, all contact ceased. When a secondary retrieval team arrived days later, they found nothing. No frigate, no debris, no bodies. Only a Vox recorder, still functional, drifting freely. On it, one phrase repeated endlessly in broken High Gothic. The stars are wearing masks. Most tech priests dismissed it, a failure of psychic shielding, a data artifact corrupted by proximity to the warp. But over the next 50 years, sightings increased. Ships once thought destroyed during the Horus heresy began to reappear on Imperial augurs. The Velox Imperialis, believed torn apart over Prospero, was seen adrift in the Callian expanse. The faithful sword, lost during Abaddon's Third Black Crusade, blinked into existence above a mining colony in the Centrius Belt, only to vanish again before contact could be made. The common thread. None of these ships responded to Vox hails. They bore no living crew. And those who approached them never returned. The ghost lights are not static phenomena. They move, they adapt, and their behavior is intelligent. That is what most terrifies the Inquisition. One Ordo Chronos agent, before he disappeared, claimed that the lights appear where memories are strongest, sites of betrayal, loss, or bloodshed. He called them echoes stitched together from grief and radiation. To see a ghost light is to remember something you've never experienced. That's the part no cogitator has explained. There are testimonies from survivors, few as they are, who speak of recognition. A sergeant aboard the unfaltering Spear swore he saw his brother's face peering through a viewing port in the Phantom ship, despite the fact his brother had died on Armageddon years earlier. A junior tech adept fainted after identifying the rusted hulk of the St. Orison, a ship she had never seen, but whose layout she somehow knew. And yet the ghost lights can be touched. That's the contradiction. They flicker, yes, but they have hull mass. They cast shadows. Boarding clamps connect. Some even bear operational servitor units. ancient, decayed beyond recognition, but functioning well enough to open airlocks or greet visitors with distorted hymns to the Emperor. And once aboard, they change. There is no standard layout. Rooms shift, gravity flickers, lights stutter. One inquisitorial audio log features a voice calmly narrating as his team moved deeper into a vessel believed to be the Sword of Saint Laurent. At the 10-minute mark, his voice begins to double, speaking the same words but slightly out of sync. By 20 minutes, the second voice is ahead of the first. By 30, both voices are speaking different events. By the end of the tape, the speaker is calmly describing his own death, even as the original voice continues. The log ends with laughter, his own. And then silence. What few understand is that the ghost lights serve a function. They are not accidents. They are traps. Bait. The leading theory among the Ordo Malleus is that these spectral vessels are constructs of the warp, stitched together by demons or entities that have fed long enough to understand human longing, the desire for return, for closure, for reunion. The warp does not seduce with the grotesque, it lures with comfort, and that is what the ghost lights are, the familiar face at the end of a dark hallway. But there is another theory, one so profane it is kept only in the black vaults of Terra, accessible by fewer than 100 souls in the entire Imperium. According to fragments of the Kabbalite codices, Eldar records far older than the Imperium, there once existed a force known only as the Unbound Choir. It was not a being, but a collective echo, a living resonance of ships and souls lost to the warp, kept intact by the grief of those who remembered them. The choir had no body, but it sang through things, through steel, through pain, through memory. Some believe the ghost lights are the choir made manifest, not by intention but by repetition, that every ship mourned too long, every name etched into cathedral walls, every imperial saint honored for a martyrdom in space, feeds this resonance. That the warp, listening as it always does, gave it form, and now it wants to be known. That is why they appear imperial, why they reflect vessels long lost. They are not lies, not entirely. They are reflections, bent but recognizable. Your loss played back to you until you step willingly into the mouth of something that cannot be seen until too late. The ghost lights rarely linger. Some remain visible for an hour, others blink in and out over days, but always they vanish before a second contact attempt can be made. Always they leave no trace, not even a wake. And yet, not all who encounter them are taken. In one strange account from M42.012, an escort craft from Battlefleet Ultima reported a ghost light trailing them across 5 systems. The vessel was identified as a match for the Resolute Vow, a ship known to have been destroyed during the Damocles Gulf conflict. The light never closed distance, never responded. It simply followed, appearing each time the fleet re-entered real space. After 6 jumps, it vanished for good. The captain of the escort, a woman named Tirana Voss, retired shortly after. She claimed she knew why the ghost light never attacked. Her father had served aboard the original Resolute Vow. She said the ship was just making sure she got home. Make of that what you will. There is no protocol for ghost lights, no countermeasure, no command directive. Because we do not understand them. They are not demonic in the traditional sense, nor are they machines despite wearing the faces of our lost. They are something else, a mirror perhaps, or a whisper, and they are increasing. As the galaxy fractures, as the cicatrix maledictum grows wider, the veil between real and unreal thins. And wherever grief clings too tightly, wherever the void tastes regret, the ghost lights flicker into view. They do not announce themselves with screams or weapons. They don't need to. They simply appear in the perfect shape of what you miss most. It started with silence. No screams, no distress calls, just the sudden, complete absence of life from the system of Narcine Theta. One moment it was bustling, a minor forge moon, a dozen orbital platforms, and a network of transport ships spiraling through its upper atmosphere like silver insects. Then nothing, not static, not wreckage, not flame, just a hole carved into the galaxy. The Imperium sent a scout, as they always do, a single Cobra-class destroyer, Vigilant Harmony. Its final transmission reached back to Segmentum Command in fragments. The last audible words were, "We are not the first. They are still feeding." The transmission ended with a low, insectile clicking, repeating every 17 seconds for 7 days. The Mechanicus attempted to decipher it. They failed. The Inquisition burned the server logs and declared Narcine Theta a forbidden zone. What they didn't tell anyone, not the Navy, not even the Adeptus Astartes, was what they found 5 months later, drifting on the edge of the system. A space hulk, vast, misshapen, covered in chitinous growth and fleshy stalks that pulsed like lungs. Its hull was not entirely steel. Not anymore. It had been an Imperial ship once. The central spine bore remnants of gold-trimmed armor, now cracked and weeping green ichor. The nameplate was scorched, but still legible under the layers of organic tissue. Harrowing gale. A deep space cruiser declared missing in M41.229. Long presumed dead. It was not dead. Inside it bloomed. The boarding servitors sent by the Mechanicus didn't last 5 minutes. The video feeds showed corridors slick with bio-slime, bulkheads throbbing like veins. Unseen things skittered in the dark, never fully visible, never lingering. Lights flickered, revealing claw marks etched into ceramite walls. One drone glimpsed what appeared to be a large sack suspended from the ceiling, swaying gently. Inside was a human, a crewman perhaps, still alive, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream that never came. The image cut out as dozens of tendrils descended. The Adeptus Mechanicus has a term for it. Xenoform mycogenesis, the process by which tyrannid spores invade and corrupt inorganic matter. Normally this occurs on planets. A world is seeded, its biomass absorbed, and the Hive Fleet moves on. But this was different. This was a ship turned into a node, an anchor in the void, a drifting, breathing factory of bioalgorithms and evolutionary chaos. And it was not alone. Records show that tyrannid presence on derelict ships isn't unknown. Hive Fleet Leviathan was witnessed using captured Orc cruisers during the Battle of Sinford Drift. Hive Fleet Gorgon hollowed out the moon frigate Ilumvira and used it to lure in civilian traffic for assimilation. But what occurred aboard the harrowing gale was something else entirely. It was intentional. Genestealer cults embedded aboard Imperial ships had, for decades, operated in secrecy, planting themselves within crews, breeding slowly, whispering the will of the hive mind in the quiet dark between systems. They spread corruption not through overwhelming force, but by faith, by intimacy. Entire subcrews of macro-haulers worshipped the star-born deities hidden in their hold. When their numbers were sufficient, they waited for their parent fleets to die. Dereliction, warp failure, pirate attack. It didn't matter. And once the vessel was declared lost, they grew. The harrowing gale was merely the first to be found. Since then, 7 others have been identified, none officially acknowledged. Their names erased from the naval rolls, their crew records purged. These hulks are not drifting carcasses. They are seeds. The hive forms aboard them do not spread like standard tyrannid incursions. They do not drop spores onto planetary crusts or launch biopods. Instead, they wait, lurking in dead systems, lurking at the edge of warp translation paths, mimicking debris. The moment a ship draws close, they awaken, biological sentries blooming open like flowers, spitting clouds of pheromone signals into the void. Then the hunger comes. Unlike planetary assaults, these attacks are surgical, clean. The tyrannid organisms aboard the Hulk do not aim to destroy, they capture. Specimens are absorbed. Vox channels are left unjammed, not out of ignorance but as part of the lure. In one recovered data slate, a captain's log ends with the crew encountering what they believed to be a fleeing civilian vessel. When they boarded, they found no resistance, just silence. Every corridor led inward. Every room was full of empty garments, neatly folded. In the final entry, the captain writes, "I believe we're being watched, not hunted, studied." And that is the true horror. These aren't just bio-ships. They're observatories for the hive mind, stations in the black, learning how we fight, how we think, how we feel. Each Hulk brims with information, stolen thoughts, torn memories, behavioral data recorded in organic nerve nodes that pulse softly in the dark. One inquisitor, Thal Ormini, later declared excommunicate traitorous, argued that these Hulks represented a third phase of the Tyrannid invasion. First came the scouts, then came the fleets, now comes the mimicry. He theorized that the hive mind was no longer content to consume. It sought to understand. He claimed the Tyrannids were growing more selective, sampling cultures the way a surgeon samples tissue. These Hulks, these seed ships, are part of a slow, deliberate process. Not a war of attrition, a harvest of intelligence. His final dispatch concluded with a chilling warning. We will lose this war not when we are devoured, but when we are replaced. The Ordo Xenos tried to bury his research. They feared what it implied, but his findings are echoed now by others. Rogue traders speak of ships whose interiors have become completely organic, yet whose crews still wear the faces of men. They smile, they salute, they request docking codes, and they are hollow. Perhaps worst of all is what was found aboard the seventh known Seed Hulk, recovered by a detachment of Death Watch from Watch Fortress Arian. It was codenamed Seedfall Delta. The boarding team encountered no resistance, no life signs. They made it as far as the core before they found it. A library, not of books, of brains, hundreds of craniums arranged in neat rows, suspended in nutrient gel, connected by neural filaments to a central pulsating node. The thoughts of entire generations, captured, stored, indexed. What they read on the central wall is now sealed by inquisitorial edict. But the words were burned into the minds of every space marine present. We know you. We are you. You are next. It is not the size of these hulks that frightens those who study them. It is their purpose. They are not graveyards. They are greenhouses. Tyrannid evolution has always been fast, but these seed hulks suggest something else. A cultivation of traits, a deliberate farming of fear, a slow, patient weaving of humanity into the hive. And so they drift, quiet, breathing, learning. Not every horror in the void comes with fangs. Some just wait. There is a corridor, long abandoned, buried deep beneath the Proctorium archives of Terra. No servitors clean it. No cherubim sing here. It smells of incense long burnt out and data paper rotted to mold. Along its walls are seals, some imperial, some not, and in its center sits a single vault door lined with rusting adamantium and sealed with over 30 purity locks. On that door, someone, no record says who, scratched a warning in high Gothic. Truth should not be unchained. Inside is a memory that refused to die. The Inquisition calls it the penance engine. The name is not technical. It is not formal. It was coined by a man whose name was stripped from the rolls, whose voice lives only in a garbled, corrupted Vox recording found in the ruins of Clavis Rex, A station destroyed when the ship it once orbited came back from the warp screaming. The ship in question was the Reverentia Bellax, a proud vessel once forged in the orbital yards of Hydra 4, consecrated with a full ecclesiarchal choir present. It served the Imperial Navy faithfully for 2 centuries, operating along the border fringes of the Segmentum Pacificus. Records show it participated in no fewer than 17 campaigns, including the cleansing of the Vargos Reaches and the siege of Tolenhart. It had history. It had honor. Then it was lost, swallowed in the blink of an eye. Warp travel has never been safe, but the disappearance of the Reverentia Bellax struck a strange chord. No warning, no Geller field anomaly, just silence. She vanished en route to rendezvous with Battlefleet Agastus. A missing ship is not unusual. What was unusual was that it returned, 80 years later. The Bellax emerged near the tomb world of Cordatus III, flickering from the immaterium like a nightmare gasping for air. Its engines were dead. Its hull bore deep, corrosive scarring, burns that pulsed like fresh wounds even after atmospheric exposure. A nearby listening post caught a single vox ping. We heard the bells. We marched in chains. When a detachment of the Exorcists chapter arrived to investigate, they found the ship intact but silent. Its exterior had changed. Protrusions of twisted iron stretched from its spine like rebar forced through flesh. Saint-engraved Aquilas had melted into mockeries of themselves, half-winged things with broken swords and eyeless faces. The Exorcists, hardened veterans of demon hunts and warp-born abominations, described what they found inside as ritualized torment. The Bellax had not been ravaged, it had been transformed. Every hallway bore the marks of deliberate defilement. Chains hung from every bulkhead, not in disorder, not randomly, but placed, measured, counted. Each chain had an engraved number. Each number corresponded to a name carved into the floor beneath it. Those names matched the ship's original crew manifest, every last one of them. The bodies were never found, only the chains. Hundreds, thousands, an entire ship reimagined as a prison. But not a prison of containment, a prison of devotion. The bridge had become a shrine. Where once command thrones sat, there was now a dais, crafted from fused naval helmets and liturgical panels. In place of the captain's chair, a massive bronze cage. Inside it, a figure, skeletal, armored, alive. The Exorcists identified it as Captain Vorello Hark, the ship's original commander. He had not aged, but his body had been broken, rebuilt, and rebroken 100 times. His jaw had been replaced with a vox grill that spat corrupted catechisms with every breath, and around his neck were 44 chains, all terminating in iron loops set into the deck. He was the Bellax. He commanded it still. The last surviving member of the boarding party, Brother Cleric Othran, was found drifting in an escape pod 3 days later, naked and blind. His eyes had been removed, surgically. His tongue was pierced with a key made of bone. He whispered only one thing, over and over, until the day he died. They forged salvation from sin. We gave them the chains. The Inquisition quarantined the Bellax immediately, but by then it was too late. Within months, reports came from other ships that had passed near the Bellax's drift. Crews began displaying erratic behavior, ritual flagellation, obsessive cataloging of pain, the carving of names into their own skin. One vessel, the Sanction of Will, sent back logs describing a need to earn forgiveness. By suffering, by structure. Entire crews converted, not to chaos as it is traditionally known, not to the worship of the dark gods, but to something else, a discipline of torment, an ideology of penitence through order, where every act of brutality was a measure of worth, and every drop of blood spilled a step toward redemption. This heresy had no known icon, no demonic patron, only the chain, the sound of it dragging, the weight of it pressing down. Those who studied the Bellax eventually realized what it had become, a warp echo of imperial doctrine, twisted inward. It spoke the Emperor's truth, but louder, harsher. It offered purity not through service, but through martyrdom without end. It didn't seduce with pleasure, it converted through guilt. Records of similar vessels soon surfaced: Chorus Mortalis, Endless Mortarion, Catina Vexillum, all lost ships. All returned bearing the same message: suffer to be seen. None of these hulks are classified under a single god's domain. They do not bear the hallmarks of Nurgle's wrath or Slaanesh's delight. There is no hint of Tzeentch's scheming or Khorne's fury. Instead, these ships have become self-contained heresies, religions born in the warp, powered by memory, guilt, and faith warped into fanaticism. What is worse, these hulks still respond to Imperial codes. They accept docking signals, they flash navigational lights, they pretend to be what they once were. It is a mimicry born of belief. One report from a Battlefleet Ultima frigate described being hailed by the Righteous Flame, a ship thought destroyed during the Gothic War. Its voice identified itself as Captain Dern Hesk, a decorated hero. It requested assistance. It claimed engine failure. It used the correct dialect, tone, and Imperial protocols. When boarding parties arrived, they found no crew, only Vox speakers mounted on every wall, each looping Hesk's voice over and over, reciting the same prayer. We burn because we must. We burn because we can. The team withdrew, barely. The Righteous Flame then turned and entered the warp. It has not been seen since. These are the chains of heresy, not merely metal links, but ideas forged in the deepest parts of the immaterium and wrapped around vessels of the imperium like nooses of the soul. No battle can be fought against them with bolter or blade. They do not conquer through force. They convert by appealing to the very virtues the imperium holds sacred: sacrifice, purity, suffering. They offer freedom, not from chaos, but from uncertainty. And in this galaxy, where hope is fleeting and pain is the only constant, that is sometimes all it takes. So when you hear the sound of chains dragging in the dark between systems, when your ship receives a signal bearing the name of a vessel lost to time, do not respond. Do not listen. Because once you hear the sermon, it is already too late. War in the 41st millennium leaves scars across planets, across stars, but the worst scars are the ones it leaves in memory, not just in the minds of men, but in the warp itself, where history burns forever like a wound that never closes, and sometimes it echoes back at us. The story of the Vox Angelis begins not on a battlefield, but after one. After the Second War for Armageddon, after the fires had gone cold and the dead were counted. The orcs had been pushed back, for now, and the Imperial war machine turned to rebuilding. Tens of thousands of ships had cycled through the war zone: freighters, troop transports, hospital carriers, and warships of every class. Amid that endless tide of metal and faith was the Vox Angelis, a modest communion ship built to bear the Emperor's word to the front lines. It was not a weapon. It bore no torpedoes, no broadsides. Instead, it carried archives, holy scripture, sermon canticles, the recorded voices of sainted confessors. Choirs of cyber psalters sang through the decks, their songs transmitted to beleaguered troops through long-range voxcasters. The Vox Angelis was the Imperium's answer to fear, a song of purpose in the dark. And then it vanished, not during the war, not during a warp jump. It was in orbit, stationary, unarmed, preparing to depart for the shrine world of Ophelia 7. Its Geller fields were intact, its astropaths were confirmed healthy. Then, in the space of a breath, it was simply gone. Some claimed it had never existed, that it was a fabrication, a clerical myth, a misfiled hull number swallowed by the endless red tape of the Munitorum. Others, however, remembered. Too many. Entire regiments remembered sermons broadcast from its vox spirals. A dozen high confessors remembered walking its halls. The Order of the Argent Shroud recalled offering final rites aboard it after the massacre of Dravuun's Hollow. Its absence was too present to be forgotten. For decades, the Imperium searched in silence, and then, nearly 90 years later, the Vox Angelus spoke again. The signal came from the Ardent Drift, a dead zone in the Segmentum Solar, where warp tides coil like serpents and time bends itself into knots. A Navy outpost picked up the transmission on a forbidden Vox channel, a hymn of benediction sung by a choir not heard in nearly a century. At first they thought it was a hoax, a mistake, but then came the name. This is the Vox Angelus, servant of his word, ship of the sacred echo. When the Fury Unto Dawn, a Dominator-class cruiser, reached the location, it found the ship drifting. No warp scars, no battle damage. Its hull was pristine. Lights flickered in sequence. Power readings suggested a full-functioning drive system. It looked normal. But when they hailed her, there was no reply. No human reply, at least. The boarding party found the interior cold and pressurized. No bodies, no signs of struggle, but sound, constant, whispers. The decks trembled with faint transmissions, as if 1,000 Vox hymns were playing on different frequencies, overlapping, out of sync. Familiar prayers were spoken with unfamiliar inflection. The ship wasn't dead. It was replaying itself. In the nave chamber, where sermons once rang out, stood the choir. Not mechanical, not biological. Something in between, figures shaped like humans but transparent and fluid, formed entirely of energy pulses. They stood in their places, silent, until one of the boarding crew approached. Then they turned as one and opened their mouths. There was no sound, not at first. And then came the screams. The boarding party transmitted a single burst of data before their systems shut down entirely. Those who viewed the footage described one thing above all. Not the horror, not the light, but the recognition. The crewmen screamed because they knew the things that stood before them. Not by sight, but by voice. Each spectral choir member spoke in a voice from the listener's past. Dead comrades, lost loved ones, martyrs remembered from childhood prayers. The ship did not haunt, it reflected. Imperial scholars now believe that the Vox Angelus had become a resonant anchor, a rare, theorized phenomenon wherein a ship's psychic residue is so saturated with belief, it becomes imprinted into the warp itself. Most anchors fade, some become waystones, but this one had become something else, a mirror for memory. The warp does not understand time as we do. It bleeds moments together, carries the dead forward and the living backward. When the Vox Angelus entered the warp for its fated journey, something responded. Not a demon, not a chaos god, but something older, perhaps even a natural phenomenon of the immaterium, an echo that heard the song of faith and decided to sing back. But it could not mimic perfectly. It could not recreate what it did not understand. So it twisted. It bent the voices of hope into fear, the words of faith into noise. The prayers were repeated endlessly, not as scripture, but as hunger. On the 6th boarding attempt, the team included an Adeptus Sororitas Canoness, Sister Maven Thricebound. Her presence was deliberate. She had once served aboard the Vox Angelus, decades prior, as a junior hospitaller. She knew its corridors by heart. She claimed she had dreams of the ship returning, dreams that ended with a whisper. The choir forgets the silence. When she entered the chapel decks, the whispers stopped. The specters looked at her, every one of them, and they bowed. For 23 minutes her life signs remained stable. Then a spike, an overwhelming psychic pulse burst from the ship, blacking out auger systems across 3 sectors. By the time the sensors recovered, she was gone. So was the ship, not destroyed, missing again. All that remained was a single Vox recording. Her voice, calm, resolute. The echo never wanted to harm us. It needed us to remember. It sings because we forgot the words. We turned faith into duty, into order. But it was never meant to be memorized. It was meant to be felt. I will stay. I will teach them the true hymn. The ecclesiarchy burned that message, but it spread anyway. Among low-level confessors, among void-born preachers. The story of the Vox Angelis became legend, an angelic ship that comes when all hope is lost, that sings to the wounded, that weeps with the dying. But those who truly study the warp know it isn't salvation. It is a reminder, a spiritual scar left by a war that devoured billions, a vessel that bled so much faith into the imperium that the warp breathed it back, malformed and mournful. They say the ship still appears, in battle zones, on the fringes of warp storms, always in the distance, always just out of reach. A cathedral drifting among stars, playing broken hymns from speakers that never fall silent. The warriors who hear it say it gives them courage, that the fear fades when its song begins. But sometimes, when the song ends, they claim to hear a different sound, quieter, older. A voice asking again and again, "Do you remember the words?" The boarding party transmitted a single burst of data before their systems shut down entirely. Those who viewed the footage described one thing above all. Not the horror, not the light, but the recognition. The crewmen screamed because they knew the things that stood before them. Not by sight, but by voice. Each spectral choir member spoke in a voice from the listener's past. Dead comrades, lost loved ones, martyrs remembered from childhood prayers. The ship did not haunt, it reflected. Imperial scholars now believe that the Vox Angelis had become a resonant anchor, a rare, theorized phenomenon wherein a ship's psychic residue is so saturated with belief, it becomes imprinted into the warp itself. Most anchors fade. Some become waystones, but this one had become something else, a mirror for memory. The warp does not understand time as we do. It bleeds moments together, carries the dead forward and the living backward. When the Vox Angelis entered the warp for its fated journey, something responded. Not a demon, not a chaos god, but something older, perhaps even a natural phenomenon of the immaterium, an echo that heard the song of faith and decided to sing back. But it could not mimic perfectly. It could not recreate what it did not understand. So it twisted. It bent the voices of hope into fear, the words of faith into noise. The prayers were repeated endlessly, not as scripture, but as hunger. On the 6th boarding attempt, the team included an Adeptus Sororitas Canoness, Sister Maven Thricebound. Her presence was deliberate. She had once served aboard the Vox Angelis, decades prior, as a junior hospitaller. She knew its corridors by heart. She claimed she had dreams of the ship returning, dreams that ended with a whisper. The choir forgets the silence. When she entered the chapel decks, the whispers stopped. The specters looked at her, every one of them, and they bowed. For 23 minutes, her life signs remained stable. Then a spike, an overwhelming psychic pulse burst from the ship, blacking out auger systems across 3 sectors. By the time the sensors recovered, she was gone. So was the ship, not destroyed, missing again. All that remained was a single Vox recording. Her voice, calm, resolute. The echo never wanted to harm us. It needed us to remember. It sings because we forgot the words. We turned faith into duty, into order. But it was never meant to be memorized. It was meant to be felt. I will stay. I will teach them the true hymn. The ecclesiarchy burned that message, but it spread anyway, among low-level confessors, among void-born preachers. The story of the Vox Angelis became legend, an angelic ship that comes when all hope is lost, that sings to the wounded, that weeps with the dying. But those who truly study the warp know it isn't salvation. It is a reminder, a spiritual scar left by a war that devoured billions, a vessel that bled so much faith into the imperium that the warp breathed it back, malformed and mournful. They say the ship still appears, in battle zones, on the fringes of warp storms, always in the distance, always just out of reach. A cathedral drifting among stars, playing broken hymns from speakers that never fall silent. The warriors who hear it say it gives them courage, that the fear fades when its song begins. But sometimes, when the song ends, they claim to hear a different sound, quieter, older, a voice asking again and again, "Do you remember the words?" The Mercy was quarantined upon arrival. The boarding vessel was incinerated. But the surveillance logs remain, kept deep within the Ordo Hereticus vaults. The footage reveals something impossible. When the boarding craft redocked, its outer hull had changed. Not visibly, but when scanned, the name printed on its side was not the same. Its call sign now read Deliverance Ark, a designation not used by the Adeptus Ministorum in over 5,000 years. Even stranger, the ship smelled different. The Magos Biologis attending the investigation noted trace remnants of perfumed oils like those used in ancient ecclesiarchal rites from the pre-Reformation era. No current records matched the chemical signature. The Ordo concluded, privately, that the maze had returned the craft, but not as it had received it. Not entirely. Other incidents followed. The Lance of Truth, a patrol cutter from Battlefleet Scarus, reported discovering an identical drifter hovering above a shattered moon. Its crew docked, explored 3 decks, and reported clean corridors, active lumen strips, and soft, ambient vox chants praising the Emperor. Then something changed. One of the armsmen, designated Korsk 17, began speaking in Old Terran, a language he did not know. Another began crying uncontrollably, claiming she had been here before, in a dream decades ago. Her personal logs were retrieved after the mission. Inside, she had drawn maps of the ship's interior. The layouts matched precisely with what they encountered, except her drawings were dated 5 years before the maze was officially encountered by the Imperium. This is a recurring detail. Individuals who survive the maze report a sense of déjà vu, not as metaphor but as fact. They know the ship. They dream of it. Some report waking up with bruises in the shape of impact harnesses. Others wake reciting the emergency protocols of vessels that no longer exist. The leading theory is this: the maze doesn't just drift through space. It drifts through memory, a recursive pocket of psychic reflection, formed in the warp not through construction, but through remembrance. These ships are built from what we forget. The Navigators Guild has grown increasingly uneasy. Several now refuse to plot courses anywhere near the drift wastes. One navigator under mind lock at the Scholastia Psychana revealed that the maze project's false routes, corridors through the warp that are easier to travel, smoother to navigate. But they don't lead to real space. They lead back to the maze. And once you've seen it, it remembers you. One infamous report, long suppressed, tells of the glory of Halanthos, a rogue trader vessel that encountered the maze and escaped. 10 years later, its Geller field began to fail, not due to warp fluctuation, but because the ship's machine spirit began rerouting power away from it. When the crew tried to override, the engines locked. The ship reversed course on its own. Navigation cogitators flashed an impossible coordinate string. When translated, it simply read, "Come home. The glory was never found again." There are no protocols for dealing with the drifters, no warning beacons, no exterminatus orders. Because they are not threats in the traditional sense, they don't fire, they don't chase, they invite, and they teach. Or perhaps they remember. The warp is not chaos alone. It is reflection. It mirrors the thoughts of mankind, not just the hatred and violence, but also the quietest things: longing, regret, nostalgia. The maze, if that is what all these ships are, may not be a single vessel at all. It may be us, projected back through a glass of storm and shadow. So, when the lights flicker near the edge of a warp jump, and the silhouette of a ship not on any manifest appears, do not hail it. Do not answer its beacons, because some things in the void are not lost. They are waiting for you to remember them. Some stories are not told in chapel halls or guard mess decks. Some are too dangerous to repeat, even in whispers. They don't get transcribed into mission briefings or sung about in schola hymnals. They survive only as shadow, half-buried data fragments, redacted scrolls, and deathbed confessions from men who knew too much. This is one of those stories. It begins, fittingly, with a lie. In M41.982, the cruiser Martyr's Gift was reported destroyed in a warp storm en route to a Black Templar's crusade fleet. That was the official record, signed, sealed, and buried in the Administratum's dull silence. No distress beacon was ever found, no crew listed as survivors. The story should have ended there, but it didn't, because 6 months later, the Martyr's Gift returned. Warp-scarred, systems locked down, drifting toward the orbital ring of Exitus Prime, a minor forge world deep within the Segmentum Obscurus. Local defense monitors raised the alarm. They hailed the ship repeatedly. It responded with a single signal: passage secured, mission complete, stand ready to receive cargo. What followed was a political blackout so absolute that even the Adeptus Mechanicus blinked. Aboard that ship, sequestered in a sealed vault beneath 3 layers of quarantine-grade shielding, was an inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus, a man the Imperium had believed dead for nearly 50 years. His name was Coster Holn. Holn was a radical by any measure, though not in the ways that radicals usually burn. He didn't seek communion with demons. He didn't trust xenos. He did something far worse in the eyes of the Inquisition. He listened to the warp. Not through sanctioned psychana rites or Lex-approved predictive rituals, but through something he called empathic echo reading, a fringe philosophy that argued the warp could be interpreted as language, a broken, hostile, traumatized language, yes, but one that could be parsed, understood, negotiated with. He proposed the warp was not merely a sea of emotion, but a conscious archive of mankind's actions, memories, and fears, and that sometimes, just sometimes, it spoke back. He was declared heretical in 41.933 after publishing the sealed thesis Lacunae Bellum on the soul print of void travel. Holm disappeared shortly after, last seen boarding the Martyr's Gift, supposedly on a mission to investigate a rumored demonic artifact found within the wreckage of a drifting space hulk near the Cadian Gate. That space hulk was later codenamed Oblivion Spiral. The spiral had no confirmed origin. Its configuration shifted constantly, a labyrinthine knot of Imperial vessels fused with alien hulls of unknown classification. The spiral's presence defied long-range sensors. Ships approaching it experienced blackouts. Navigators bled from the eyes. Auspex readings melted into recursive loops. Holm called it a library. He believed the spiral was not a battlefield or trap, but a recording, a physical resonance of past trauma burned so deeply into the warp that it took form. He intended to enter, not to destroy or seal it, but to find what he called the anchor event, the emotional singularity at the heart of the Hulk, the core moment that birthed its endless drift. And he did. He was gone for 6 standard years. When he returned, his hair had whitened, his face bore a lattice of scarification, and his voice had changed. Not deeper, not weaker, just stripped, like the warp had filed away every unnecessary tone. He refused to speak for the first 11 days. The tech priests who scanned him found no taint, no possession, no trace of psychic interference. But there was something else. In his chest, just behind the sternum, was a small metallic implant. Unknown material. Not surgically placed. Grown. Holon called it the Pact Shard. He said it allowed him to speak where no tongue survives and hear where silence was born. He claimed the spiral was still growing, that more Hulks like it were forming. Born from mass psychic ruptures, planetary exterminations, failed crusades, even hive-world collapses. The Imperium was generating them like tumors, ships torn from time and stitched into living grave masses, echoing the moments of their death forever. He had gone into the spiral to see if it could be stopped, not through fire, but through understanding. The others in the Inquisition called it madness, a gambit of arrogance. They moved to have him purged, but not all agreed. In the deepest layers of the Ordo Malleus, there are operatives who do not wage war with bolter or flame. They deal in containment, in delay, in redirection, and they believed Holn. They gave him clearance, they gave him ships, and they gave him subjects. Over the next 8 years, Holn led classified expeditions to 3 additional space hulks, the Quiet Reproach, the Veil of Reason, and Signal Omega Null. Each one had appeared spontaneously in different systems. Each one had identical internal architecture. Each bore records of Imperial tragedies, long thought buried. Inside the Reproach, Holn found Vox logs from the fall of Cantriel Prime, despite the fact that world had been glassed by Exterminatus 2 centuries earlier. Inside the Veil of Reason, the ship was filled with echoes of sermons from a planet that had never existed on any chart. And Signal Omega Null, perhaps the most disturbing, contained an exact replica of the Council Chamber of Terror. Scale perfect, complete down to the banners of the High Lords. But the faces inside the hololiths were wrong, twisted into mockeries but recognizable. Holm claimed they weren't fabrications. He believed the warp was replaying our sins, holding a mirror to our self-inflicted wounds, and each time a tragedy went unacknowledged, each time a war crime was buried under the rubble, the warp kept it. It stored it, and then one day manifested it in physical form. That was the spiral's purpose, to make us remember. But there was a cost. On his final expedition, Holm brought with him a null, a blank psyker, soul-voided from birth. The theory was that the null's presence would mute the spiral's reactions, allowing a safe passage into its innermost deck. The mission began smoothly. They docked. They descended. Then silence. No screams, no alarms, just the sudden loss of all telemetry. 17 days later, the spiral vanished from real space. It didn't explode. It didn't warp out. It simply wasn't there anymore. Of Holm, there was no trace. Only one data fragment remained, corrupted, half-scorched, found embedded in the memory coils of the expedition ship's command console. It was Holm's voice. I asked it what it wanted. I asked it what it needed. And it answered. It said, a witness. The Inquisition buried it all. But rumors spread. There are captains who swear they've seen the spiral reappear, just for a moment, blinking in and out at the edge of systems where great atrocities took place. Others speak of voices in the warp, repeating phrases Holm was known to say. And every year more hulks like it appear. Somewhere in the dark between stars, the echoes of our sins are knitting themselves into shape, not out of hatred, out of remembrance. Holland gambled everything that understanding would be enough to stop them. But the warp doesn't bargain. It documents. There is a system so distant, so shrouded in gravitic turbulence and warp distortion, that it appears on no official star maps. It has no name, only a code etched in the fragmented records of a lost explorator fleet, R731//Black Key. Most of those who tried to reach it never returned. Those who did were altered, silent, irreparably broken. Their final reports were rambling, scattered across hundreds of corrupted Vox files. Only 2 words were repeated, each time with increasing urgency: Vault active. What came to be known, at least within the Ordo Xenos and a select few radical magi, as the Vault of the Damned was first detected not through astropathic chorus or auger scan, but through dreams. In the year 1041.889, across 17 different planets and void stations, sanctioned psychers began to suffer simultaneous night terrors. Visions of infinite corridors made of bone-white metal, doors that pulsed like hearts, chains that whispered prayers. The psychers emerged from sleep weeping blood, clawing at their own skulls, many of them succumbing to full possession or spontaneous soul immolation. The Administratum labeled it an echo anomaly, an occurrence known to ripple outward from warp breach events. But one psyker, a low-ranked choir adept named Nemia Skall, survived. She could not speak. Her tongue had been severed by her own teeth. But she wrote. She drew, over and over, a single symbol, a broken aquila, inverted and entwined with a spiral of runes. The same symbol, it would later be discovered, that adorned the main entry bulkhead of a derelict found in orbit above R731//Black Key, a vault ship. Unlike standard space hulks, this vessel bore no composite hallmarks, no conglomeration of different ships, no splicing of wreckage. It was singular, purpose-built, and impossibly old. Initial scans by the investigating Mechanicus team from Explorator Arc Mecha Orison failed to penetrate the hull. Every attempt to access the vessel resulted in system feedback. Machine spirits screaming, Vox relays exploding, cogitator banks melting into slag. One tech adept was reduced to a fetal position after simply touching the exterior. He whispered, again and again, "It remembers its prisoners." It took 32 days and the death of 3 magi before entry was achieved via breaching torpedo and teleportation. What the team discovered inside defied Imperial doctrine, logic, and in some cases, sanity. The vessel was empty but not abandoned. There were no servitors, no crew, no demons writhing in shadow. But the halls were active. Lights flickered with power. Air scrubbers hummed. Doors hissed open at their approach. The vessel wanted them to come inside. And in the center, in the deepest chamber, 7 layers beneath the reinforced adamantium decks, they found the vault. It was a chamber unlike anything recorded in Mechanicus design schemata. Vast, circular. The walls were not walls at all, but sealed stasis cells, each containing a figure, not frozen, not dead, trapped. There were 22 in total. Entities suspended in columns of violet-tinged light, their forms indistinct but massive. Some bore remnants of armor, ancient, corroded, older than the imperium itself. Others were clothed in robes made from what looked like woven auramite, etched with symbols not seen since the earliest days of the Age of Strife. A few had no recognizable body at all, just swirls of matter and consciousness, somehow held in the coils of the vault. The stasis fields pulsed with rhythmic chants in binary, machine song, complex and layered, forming a sonic lattice. The sound was not generated by machines. It came from within the vault itself, as if the vessel sang to its prisoners in endless lullaby, not to comfort them, to contain them. None of the figures moved, except one. In the farthest cell, near the vault's subcore, a figure turned to face the Mechanicus team. Not quickly, not violently, it just looked. A smooth, featureless face of polished onyx shifted in their direction, and smiled. The team's mission leader, Magos Thanavir Krell, ordered immediate withdrawal. But by then it was too late. Within hours, members of the crew began experiencing overlapping memories. A junior tech priest suddenly spoke fluent Citan dialects, dead languages unspoken since the war in heaven. A Skitari Alpha began reciting inquisitorial clearance codes sealed for millennia. One adept's eyes bled ink, spelling the words, "He is not forgotten. He forgives." They sealed the vault, set charges, but when they attempted to leave, the ship no longer allowed it. Navigation pathways had shifted, corridors looped. The docking port was gone, replaced by solid bulkhead. The vault had closed. Of the 218 personnel aboard the Mecha Orison, only one was recovered. A single Skitari, designated M13 Chiron, was found drifting in a life pod 6 light years from the R731 anomaly. His entire body was marked in coded scripture, tattoos carved directly into his flesh, written in an unknown hand. Among the script were the names of over 24 lost Imperial ships, ships whose fates were sealed in records, and whose names matched the hull markings later discovered embedded into the vault ship's own superstructure. The implication was undeniable. This ship was not merely a prison, it was a collector, a warden in the warp, gathering entities, vessels, and knowledge deemed too dangerous, too heretical, too ancient to be allowed to die, or to live. But who built it? No answers have been found. Theories abound, some claiming it is a relic of the dark age of technology, a failsafe created by pre-imperial humanity to store warp-corrupted anomalies. Others believe it is Necron in origin, a mobile stasis tomb designed to imprison star gods and their servants. Some whisper it is the work of the Emperor himself, constructed before his ascension. Whatever the truth, the Vault of the Damned has become something more than an object of study. It has become a magnet. Since its discovery, more ships have vanished near its coordinates, ships that reported no mechanical failure, ships that passed their machine spirit rites. They simply faded from reality, later found embedded into the vault's mass, their crews gone, their hulls stripped of identifiers and repurposed. There are even reports, unconfirmed, suppressed, that suggest the vault has begun to speak. Through dreams, through psychic bleed, through the machine code nightmares of astropaths, it calls itself Archivum Ultima, the last archive. And its message? There will be no secrets in the final war. The Inquisition has since surrounded R731//Blackkey with a permanent interdiction field. A Deathwatch company stands sentinel aboard the Sigil of Flame. Access is denied to all, even the Lords of Terra. But the vault is not bound by interdiction. It still drifts, and across the Imperium there are signs, hints, that more vaults exist. Identical architecture, identical chanting, each one waiting, watching, not to unleash terror, but to preserve it. Because some knowledge is too valuable to destroy, and the vault remembers everything. Before the Imperium, before the Emperor, before even the fragmented darkness of the Age of Strife, there was another time, a time whispered about only in the forbidden enclaves of the Ordo Chronos, in the dust-choked libraries of the Black Ships, and in the frantic, half-coherent ravings of those psychers who survive warp fractures, with their minds still limping toward sanity. It is called many things. The Lost Era, the Epoch of Silence, the Night Before Knowing. But among certain Inquisitors, among certain Magi of Mars who have abandoned doctrine for truth, it is known only by one name: the Age of the Ancients. This chapter begins with an object, unassuming, rusted, dormant. It was first detected in M42.104, buried deep within the structure of a derelict arc vessel that had fused itself to a rotting space hulk near the galactic halo. The hulk was designated Hibernus Exol, a name invented by an Adeptus Mechanicus explorator who had no record of assigning it, but could swear that he had dreamt the name long before he ever laid eyes on the ship. Hibernus Exol was dead at first glance. No power, no signatures, no movement. A shell, like so many others in the void, drifting without purpose, a tangle of bones and steel. And yet it had gravity. Not artificial, not residual. It generated its own field, entirely inconsistent with its mass. The Mechanicus was intrigued, the Ordo Xenos alarmed. A joint task force was assembled, naval support, a full Skitari cohort, 2 sanctioned psychers, and a watch sergeant of the Death Watch with a kill team drawn from 3 chapters. They breached the hulk on the 12th day of approach. Boarding parties encountered no resistance. Not even the warp-twisted remnants of former crews. What they found was worse: preservation. The decks of the inner ship were clean, pristine, not scrubbed or restored, but unchanged, as if the passage of time itself had been arrested. Lights still glowed dimly in recessed bulkheads. Cogitators buzzed with slow, pulsing logic. Some doors hissed open when approached, responding as if to long-dead command codes. At the heart of the hulk, past 6 concentric rings of recursive architecture, they found the object. A black cube, 1 meter across, suspended in a levitational field, projected from 3 pylons. The field was not mechanical. No emitter was found. The air shimmered around the cube, and the psychers immediately began to seize. One died outright. The other screamed a single word: before. The object, now codenamed Obscura Nullis, was extracted under strict containment. Null fields were established. Aboard the return vessel, Vigil Persecutor, it was placed in a hexagrammic vault surrounded by 5 meters of warded adamantium. 3 hours into the journey, the ship's astropath took her own life, slowly, methodically, with a ritual knife crafted from her own blood-frozen hair. On the wall of her cell, in glyphs that predated Imperial standard, she wrote, "It is awake. It is older than thought." The object began to vibrate. Mechanicus Magi, assuming it to be a cache from the dark age of technology, initiated a controlled diagnostic scan. The machine spirit recoiled. A scream echoed through the ship's internal Vox networks, transmitted not by speakers but by every piece of metal aboard the vessel, vibrating in unity. The sound lasted 6 seconds. 6 crew members dropped dead. Every one of them suffered identical trauma, a complete failure of neural synapses, as if the brain had simply stopped processing reality. But this was not an attack. It was a response. The cube had communicated. Encrypted Vox burst analysis revealed a string of data embedded in the scream. When decoded by a rogue Lex mechanic, later executed for unauthorized access, it translated to a single phrase: "It is time." What followed was an internal schism between the forces aboard Vigil Persecutor. The Death Watch sergeant, Brother Kieleos of the Minotaurs, believed the cube to be a xenos weapon of mass psychological destruction. The Magi disagreed, claiming it was a preserved data vault, a gift from a civilization so advanced its knowledge could elevate humanity beyond the shackles of the Imperium's brutal decline. The Ordo Xenos agent present, Inquisitor Aria Malcor, made her decision. She opened it. The cube did not unfold or shatter. It decomposed. Flakes of it simply drifted upward into the air, dissolving into motes of light, each one spinning, fractaling, forming symbols in midair faster than human eyes could register. Only the cogitators could record it. And when they did, the machines wept. Literal fluid leaked from their interface nodes, and oil secretion later confirmed to contain traces of human DNA, despite no biological material having touched the vault. The knowledge was stored in a single shard, no larger than a tooth. Malcor took it, implanted it behind her eye. 2 hours later, she was no longer Malcor. She remembered things, not visions, not prophecy, memories. First-person perspectives from a time before Terra had a sun. Civilizations of light and shadow. Beings that built cathedrals the size of moons, not in worship, but to anchor time itself. Wars that lasted nanoseconds and wiped out entire concepts, like empathy or fire. A race that harvested not energy but causality. And then, silence. A catastrophe so absolute that every culture, every people, every soul in the galaxy decided to forget, to bury the past, to hide their creations inside derelict ships, to send them adrift where no one would ever find them. Until now, until the Imperium, in its endless hunger to dominate the stars, dug too deep, unwittingly triggering the opening of vaults meant never to be opened. They aren't traps. They are reminders. Malcor wrote her last testament in her own blood before sealing herself in a void capsule and jettisoning into deep space. Her final message, broadcast in a language no longer spoken. We were not the first. We are not the last. But we are the only ones who forgot why we were warned. Since that day, the Mechanicus has found 2 more black cubes. One was destroyed before contact. The second emitted a signal that is still being decoded. The Ordo Chronos now believes there are hundreds, perhaps thousands, of such artifacts hidden across space hulks and lost void structures. Not weapons, not technologies, records. The secrets of the ancients are not simply history. They are a map, a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to the first fall of sentient life. A fall we may already be repeating. Because even now, in the void, new hulks are emerging, not from warp storms or demonic incursion, but from memory, and inside them, the lights are already on. There is a truth buried beneath every tale the Imperium dares not tell. For every crusade launched, for every triumph declared, there are legions of failures erased from the records, not by time, but by intent. Some losses are too costly to remember. Some missions fail so completely that they are unmade, their ships reclassified as never launched, their crew reabsorbed into statistical obfuscation. It is easier that way, cleaner, safer. But the warp does not forget. And in its depths there is a fleet that remembers everything. It began with an anomaly in the edges of Segmentum Tempestus, in the graveyard of the fractured stars, a region once vibrant with trade, now a crumbling halo of asteroid clusters and blackened planets. A single Vox signal emerged, repeating on a frequency not used since the Unification Wars. The signal's voice was calm, old, and unmistakably Imperial. This is Admiral Vethric Cole of the 4th Solar Expeditionary Armada. We are prepared for resupply. The Emperor protects. There were 2 problems. First, Vethric Cole had died more than 10,000 years ago. Second, the 4th Solar Expeditionary Armada had never been officially recorded in any Imperial archive. Not one. The Ordo Astartes, suspecting a xenos deception or demonic mimicry, dispatched a scout flotilla under the command of Watch Captain Ilias Rukin of the Death Watch. The flotilla was equipped with full anti-psyker shielding, nullification suites, and a contingent of Black Templars. They found the fleet. Not ruins, not wreckage. A fleet, fully operational, formed in anchor formation around the husk of a dead star. Ships arranged in mathematically perfect geosynchronous orbit. Hundreds of them. Cruisers, destroyers, even ancient Arc Mechanicus vessels. Designs lost long before the Emperor first walked among mankind. Their hulls glowed faintly, runes dancing across armor plates like frost kissed by starlight. There was no immediate hostility, no weapons locked, no void shields raised. The fleet did not respond to hails, not immediately. The Vox remained open but silent. It was as though they were listening. Then one transmission came through, delivered in ancient High Gothic, clipped with a dialect extinct since the dawn of the Great Crusade. Command authentication recognized, awaiting further orders. The voice belonged to Vethric Cole. A biometric match confirmed it, but the voice was too calm, too clean. No one speaks that evenly unless they're reading from a script burned into the soul. The Death Watch boarded the lead vessel, the Indomitable Wrath, a super-heavy command ship the size of a small moon. Its records had never appeared on any naval manifest, but the design was unmistakably proto-imperial. Decks stretched for kilometers. Hallways still bore the banners of the old Terran dynasties. They found crew, alive, breathing, working, and utterly unaware of what had passed beyond the walls of their fleet. One officer, Captain Adjutant Isel Gron, stated that they were on year 327 of their deep voyage campaign, that they had been sent to pacify xenos insurgents in the Malak Rift. That resupply had been delayed, and morale was holding at 61% efficiency. She seemed lucid, composed, professional, until she was asked about the Imperium. She blinked, tilted her head. What Imperium? It was not a challenge, not defiance, just confusion, quiet and sincere. That was the first sign something was deeply wrong. They did not know the Emperor as a god. They referred to him only as the Strategist Prime. They knew nothing of Terra's rise, of Horus's fall, of the heresies that split the galaxy 100 times. Their saints were names erased from history: Gariel Nomarch, Simna Tal, Cord Vex, all heroes who never existed, or perhaps were made not to exist. And worst of all, they believed it was still the 31st millennium. It wasn't stasis, it wasn't temporal distortion. They had simply kept going. The fleet had wandered the warp for 10,000 years, but their internal chronometers had only advanced 300. Time hadn't just passed differently, it had looped. Ship logs showed mission objectives repeating, conversations reoccurring. Officers waking to perform the same rituals, the same orders, the same engagements, over and over. And each time they repeated, the details shifted. Slightly, like a dream trying to remember itself. Whole decks aboard the Indomitable Wrath were sealed off, not by command, but by something else. Airlocks fused with bone, doors grown over with polished steel that reflected nothing. Inside, the Death Watch found echo chambers, rooms where Vox recordings from centuries ago still played on loop. Messages to Terra, battle plans, holograms of admirals long dead, issuing orders to fleets that no longer existed. And then they found the Chapel of the Forgotten. It wasn't built by human hands. The architecture was too precise, the lines too smooth. In its center stood a statue, not of the Emperor, not of any known Primarch, but of a faceless man holding a shattered helm. Below it, written in old High Gothic, "We lost the war that was never declared. We fight the battle we were made to forget." The Inquisition now believes the fleet is not a mere relic, but a product of deliberate concealment. A military asset so classified that it was excised from history itself, not just deleted, erased. What enemy required such secrecy? What purpose could a fleet of this scale have served? Some theorize the Fourth Armada was dispatched against an internal threat, perhaps a rogue STC or a xeno species capable of psychic mimicry so profound it nearly undid the Imperium before it began. Others suggest they were test subjects, part of a failed experiment to create a fleet immune to chaos by shielding them from religious ideology. If so, it succeeded. There was no sign of chaos corruption anywhere aboard the fleet, but something else was there. In the navigational core of the indomitable Wrath, a chamber larger than a cathedral was discovered, sealed tight with a barrier of unknown alloy. The Death Watch breached it. Inside, a map, a star map, unlike any known Imperial or Mechanicus design. Dozens of systems marked in red. Systems that, when later matched to current coordinates, were confirmed to be sites of warp instabilities, demon breaches, or lost planets. Every single one of them had been marked before those events happened. The fleet hadn't just been fighting, it had been predicting, acting upon intelligence sourced from something beyond time, perhaps the warp itself, perhaps an intelligence we no longer understand. The fleet's orders, logged in the sealed command core, bore no human signature, only a glyph, a circle within a triangle, burned into the steel with an accompanying phrase, "The war continues. Memory is the enemy." The Inquisition sealed the system, declared the fleet off-limits. A watch fortress now guards the dead star, and all references to the Fourth Solar Expeditionary Armada have once again vanished. But they're still there, still orbiting, still waiting for orders. And perhaps worst of all, still forgetting. Every loop erases a little more, every cycle thins the veil. Soon they may not even remember they were human, and then they'll be free. There is a myth passed in hushed tones among the Void Wanderers, those who make their living in the black gulfs between stars, ferrying cargo across half-charted warp lanes, bribing astropaths to shave hours from jump schedules, and praying they don't see anything they can't explain. These are not scholars, not warriors, not men of the cloth. But they know something most in the Imperium don't. That sometimes when the warp howls just right and the stars hang too still, a shadow comes into view, a silhouette, immense, perfectly still, a cathedral, not built on a planet, not orbiting one, but drifting, built not to worship, but to endure. The first verifiable sighting was made in M40.211. Logged in a merchant captain's emergency testament after he activated his ship's self-destruct sequence and jettisoned his crew. The Vox record was brief, broken, static scarred, but the final words were clear. It's watching, and it remembers me. Nothing else. That ship, the Magellic's Hope, was never found, but its wreckage, spread like ash across a lunar belt in the Crothon depths, was. Every escape pod opened, every occupant gone. No bodies, no blood. Only symbols, carved with surgical precision into the inside of every hatch. Ecclesiarchy cant. Specifically, litanies of penitence for apostates. Except none of the crew had ever broken faith. It was the first sign. Others followed. Rogue traders, missionary convoys, even a passing black ship returning psychers to Terra. Each recorded brief sensor ghosts or psychic disturbances that coincided with a singular recurring shape. A vessel over 40 kilometers in length, Baroque, Gothic, yet unlike any known pattern in the Segmentum Naval Register. A long spine-like superstructure, braced by sweeping wings and vast arches that held nothing within. No decks, no hangars, no defense batteries. Only airless cloisters, crypt vaults, and titanic stained-glass windows that depicted no saints, no martyrs. Just eyes, all closed. One Archmagos from Mars, after witnessing a Pict capture taken by a long-range auger probe, called it the Cathedral of Black Steel, an unofficial designation that stuck. And it was unlike any other space hulk or derelict known to Imperial authorities. Because the cathedral was not made of ships, it was not a wreckage. It was deliberate. It had been built, by who and why, no one could say. Only that it had been floating in the void longer than any star chart remembered, and that it had always been moving closer. Those who sought it out, explorators, inquisitors, even a few rogue sororitas orders, almost never returned. The rare survivors, brought back in cells or caskets, spoke with one shared certainty. It's not a place, it's a confession. A confession? What does that mean? The question haunted Inquisitor Selene Varric for most of her 40-year career. A scholar of lost imperial cults, she'd catalogued dozens of minor heresies, uncovered no fewer than 5 chaos-tainted schisms within sanctioned orders, and personally executed an entire void monastery whose confessor had claimed visions of a faith that eats light. But nothing consumed her like the cathedral. She chased it from whispers in the data streams of black ships, from fragmented records in the forbidden chambers of the Scholastica Psychana, to even the libraries of the Sororitas Hospitaller, where she found the first clue of substance. A blueprint. Not whole, not labeled. A corner torn from a scroll burned centuries ago, but it was unmistakable. Structural elements matched precisely with the pics taken from auger captures of the cathedral's hull. More importantly, it bore a seal, an aquila twisted into a loop, wings folded inward, a mark not seen since the Lucid Doctrine. For the uninitiated, the Lucid Doctrine was a short-lived, heavily suppressed spiritual movement that arose during the final years of the Great Crusade. It held that the Emperor did not want to be worshipped as a god, but as a mirror, a reflection of human potential, to be studied, not glorified. Its members built vast temples in deep space, claiming they were meant to observe the Emperor's will as it manifested across the galaxy. It was eradicated with extreme prejudice after the heresy began, all their temples destroyed, except, it seems, for one. Varric's team finally located the cathedral during a warp storm so violent it crippled her cruiser's Geller field. The vessel drifted blind for 17 hours, guided only by the light of the storm, and a faint, rhythmic pulse emanating from the darkness, like a heartbeat. When the cathedral came into view, it eclipsed their ship completely. Its form was inert, its systems long dead. Or so it seemed. But as the cruiser drew closer, the pulsing began to synchronize with the crew. Literally. Medici scans showed that every heart aboard the vessel, human, servitor, even vat-grown post-humans, began beating in perfect time with the signal. Minds dulled, emotions collapsed into numb serenity. Even the ship's machine spirit began to emit psalms through systems that had been sealed for centuries. The cathedral was speaking, not through language, not even through psychic emanation, through rhythm, through presence. Varric boarded with a kill team of Grey Knights, 3 squads fully equipped for the worst possible encounter. What they found was no enemy, no demons, no warp entities, no signs of infestation. Only architecture, row upon row of sealed confessionals, each containing a single robed figure, faces hidden, heads bowed. Statues, perhaps, or corpses. They could not be confirmed, and in the center of the cathedral, far below the vaulted bones of its nave, they found the scripture engine, a vast crystalline sphere suspended in anti-gravitic flux, humming with incalculable psychic energy. Inside it, text, billions of phrases scrolling past on every surface. Confessions, names, sins, some dated, some impossibly old, some yet to come. One Grey Knight gazed into the engine for 7 seconds. His heart stopped. His last words, "It's recording me." Varric made her final report via data slate, time-stamped M42.002. Her closing remarks have never been publicly declassified, but leaked fragments suggest she believed the cathedral was not a threat, but a record, not of imperial heresies, but of us. Every sin whispered in secret, every false prayer, every flicker of doubt in the Emperor's name. The cathedral does not punish, it does not judge, it remembers. It is our faith fossilized, and should it ever be destroyed, it is believed by certain radical ordos that the very fabric of the Emperor's divinity might shatter with it, which begs the final question: who built it? A warning, a monument, a mirror? We don't know. We only know that it is still drifting, and every time we look away, it moves closer. There are places in the void where the laws of reality fray like old cloth, where space forgets to behave and time folds in on itself like broken parchment. In these places, the warp doesn't scream, it doesn't burn, it doesn't lash out in waves of madness. It whispers, and the whisper is always the same: help us. The Imperial Navy first heard it during the cleansing of Braxis Void in 41.672, a minor campaign, barely footnoted in the annals of Battlefleet Obscurus, a routine purge of heretic raiders in a remote mining system. 3 Navy cruisers were assigned to clear the debris field that orbited the remains of a shattered forge moon. They expected nothing more than rogue satellites, looted hulls, maybe a few hidden pirates in rusting wrecks. What they found was a corridor, not a station, not a hulk. A corridor stretching for kilometers, end to end, suspended in the black. A perfect rectangle of adamantium and plasteel, lined with rusted aquilas and cracked stained glass panels. It had no thrusters, no external structure, no power readings, and yet it pulsed, as if breathing. Boarding crews entered cautiously, no resistance, no environmental hazards. Gravity held, oxygen was present, though stale. The walls were covered in soot, ash, and something older, dust that did not respond to chemical analysis, containing carbon signatures consistent with extinct Martian alloy bacteria. The deeper they went, the colder it became, not physically but emotionally. Marines reported intense feelings of guilt. One crewman fell to his knees mid-stride, screaming apologies to a mother who had died 20 years earlier. Another began reciting sins he had never committed. The ship's chaplain, a veteran of 4 Black Crusade engagements, lasted 20 minutes before his heart stopped. His final Vox record transmitted a single line: "I hear them walking behind me." There was nothing there. The corridor terminated in a single chamber, circular, quiet. In the center, a dais. Upon it, a bell, black iron, untarnished, smooth. A naval ensign, Valk Tara, touched the bell, and it rang. There was no sound, no vibration, just the immediate absolute absence of everything else. All light vanished, auspexes failed, gravity ceased. For exactly 66 seconds, no signal escaped the chamber. When the world returned, Tara was gone. In her place, a single parchment fluttering where she had stood. On it, in neat handwritten script: "She has passed through purgatory. She will not return." The corridor vanished the following day, not drifted, not warped, vanished completely. The entire boarding party, 11 officers, 3 tech priests, and a full squad of naval armsmen, were marked KIA. Their names were later removed from fleet rolls entirely. Over the next century, similar corridors began appearing throughout the segmentum, always the same, always sudden, and always marked by the echoes. That's what they came to be called. Not creatures, not diamonds, not ghosts, just echoes. Sounds where there should be none. Footsteps in vacuum, weeping over open Vox channels, prayers spoken in reverse, voices perfectly matching long-dead loved ones, memories not your own, whispered back at you with unblinking precision. One inquisitorial team recorded the phenomenon on board a recovered vessel near the Mordrath Expanse. The ship, Sable Faith, had been missing for over 300 years. When it reappeared, it was in perfect condition, despite having no crew. Inside the mess hall, they found long-cooled plates of food, candles still burning, voices still muttering over Vox links. But no people, only shadows, moving shadows. One interrogator, Thal Uren, approached one of the silhouettes. It froze, turned, spoke in the voice of his dead sister. "We're still waiting." He shot it. His bolt round passed through. The shadow did not react. It simply walked back into the corridor. The ship was purged, declared unclean, destroyed. But the echoes returned, this time aboard another vessel, days later. Same voices, same figures, same whispers. That's when the Ordo Malleus began investigating. Their findings were inconclusive. No warp signature, no demonic activity. The echoes registered as null psychic phenomena, impossible, as the warp abhors silence. It was as if these fragments, these lost voices and flickering shadows, existed in a state of unbeing. Not alive, not dead, not demonic, just displaced. The prevailing theory became this: there are places in the warp that do not consume, do not corrupt. Instead, they catch. Ships lost in translation, souls ripped from bodies during teleportation accidents, crew members who died mid-void jump with their names unspoken. These fragments fall into purgatory, not the religious concept, not the ecclesiarchy's version of the afterlife, but a region, a psychic strata just beneath the surface of warp space, where memory and identity become flotsam, adrift without anchor. And the corridors, the bells, the chambers, bridges, links between that lost realm and ours, doors that open only when someone listens long enough to hear the knocking. A particularly unorthodox psyker scholar, sanctioned by the Ordo Hereticus under permanent silence protocols, wrote the following in her final log before self-immolation: "The warp does not forget. It holds the fragments we leave behind, and it builds houses for them, hallways, bells, rooms of sorrow. We call them ghosts. They call themselves reminders." Since that day, Imperial protocol has been adjusted in several sectors. Ships encountering sudden corridor structures or unexplained shipboard auditory events are instructed not to engage. Boarding is strictly prohibited. Bells are not to be touched under any circumstance. But, as always, the warnings are sometimes ignored, especially when the voice on the Vox speaks with the tone of a long-lost friend, especially when it says, "I forgive you." That's the danger. The echoes don't demand worship. They don't curse. They don't scream. They invite. They offer comfort. And in this galaxy where faith is fear and hope is a war crime, a voice saying, "You are not alone," is the most dangerous weapon of all. And if the corridor appears before you, if the air thickens and the walls seem to pulse, and the black bell waits at the end, do not enter, because the moment you do, you're already halfway gone. The warp can twist steel. It can bend reality. It can fracture minds, summon nightmares, and swallow worlds. But there is one thing it cannot do. It cannot forget. And sometimes what it remembers, what it cherishes, it shapes into monuments. Such is the Crown of Rust. It doesn't have a designation, no naval code, no inquisitorial tag or Mechanicus archive number. It doesn't show up on Auspex scans or astral cartography. No known warp translation ever lists it as a hazard. And yet it has been seen by rogue traders with 1,000-yard stares, by drifters half-mad with radiation, by pilgrims lost on the fringes of the Astronomican's light. They all describe it the same way: an immense ring-shaped hulk, spinning slowly in the void, its outer frame jagged like shattered teeth, with towers of decaying armor plating rising like rusted cathedrals. In the center, a hole. Not just empty space, but a scar, a gravitational wound that light refuses to touch. The crown spins, but never moves, and yet it always appears in places where great deaths occurred. It was glimpsed briefly after the fall of Medrax 9, where an entire regiment of Astra Militarum was annihilated by an Orc warband in under an hour. A week later, it was spotted above the ashes of Fratuel's Folly, where a Navy flotilla mutinied and imploded its own warp drives to avoid capture by Tyranids. Always after the dying stops, never before. The Mechanicus refuses to acknowledge it. Privately, some claim it was once a ring station, a fortress void built in the dark age of technology, perhaps even one of the infamous Halo bastions, fabled orbital complexes designed to regulate human emotion during deep space colonization missions. Others say it was never a human creation, that it was built by something older, something that learned how to listen to our grief and shaped itself in its image. But if the crown of rust is not a weapon, then it is something far more dangerous. A memorial. It is not dead. It grows. Boarding teams, those rare and unfortunate enough to be dispatched by command staff who mistake duty for clarity, report that the ring is comprised entirely of wreckage, every section of it stitched together from the corpses of lost Imperial ships. Not smashed or fused randomly, as with most hulks, but deliberately arranged. Clean lines, articulated structure, as if someone or something is building. Whole battalions of Skitarii have gone missing inside its gravity shell. Vox signals vanish within minutes of entry. The last team to survive an incursion was a company of the Raven Guard, dispatched during a classified operation in 41.998. Their full mission transcript remains sealed, but fragments recovered from the apothecary's helm were smuggled out by a rogue agent of the Inquisition. The images show vast halls lined with funerary slabs. Each slab is etched with names of Imperial soldiers, millions of them. Not just those declared MIA or KIA, but names of those whose deaths were never recorded. Some are still living. One Raven Guard sergeant is seen kneeling in front of a slab bearing his own name, listed as presumed dead Istvan V. He had never fought at Istvan. He had never been to Istvan. And yet the date was accurate. The serial number matched. The listed unit was his own. Something inside the crown knows who is forgotten. Something is trying to make sure they're remembered. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. In one chamber, the walls were made of medals, commissar pins, regimental badges, honor marks, thousands of them pinned like insects behind clear adamantium. In another, a chapel. No altar, no shrine, just pews, thousands of pews, and everyone filled by mummified corpses in guard uniforms, arms folded, heads bowed, their Vox units still active, transmitting a continuous prayer loop. We served. We fell. We remember. When the Raven Guard reached the center, they found the spire, the heart of the crown, a throne, not for a king but a corpse. It sat in the middle of a hollow sphere, surrounded by gravitic anomalies that caused time to skip. Lights dimmed and brightened at random, screams echoed from no mouths. A breeze passed where no air should move. On the throne, a man, or the idea of one. Massive, gaunt, clad in ruined Mark II plate, so ancient it bore no chapter insignia, only rust, and a helm fused to the skull. He did not move, but his eyes burned faintly. When the Raven Guard approached, they stopped, not from fear, not from command, but because every member of the strike team began to see their own memories playing out around them. Comrades lost, missions failed, orders given that sent thousands to their deaths, survivors they left behind. Every regret they had buried beneath 10,000 rites of silence came rushing to the surface like a tide of ash. One Marine began reciting the full casualty list of his first battle as a scout, a list he hadn't seen in 3 centuries. Another wept, not from madness but from recognition. They weren't hallucinations. They were being shown, and the entity on the throne, whether man, machine, or demon, knew them all. The mission commander, Brother Captain Kyle Draven, gave a single order: withdrawal. They left. The entity made no move to stop them, and as they exited, the corridor they had come from closed behind them, not with noise, not with anger, just with finality, like a book that had finished being read. When they returned to their ship, the navigator's third eye bled for 6 minutes straight. He claimed to have seen a golden light within the crown's center, a light shaped like Terra. Since then, the crown has moved. Its location is never stable. It appears only when tragedy has already occurred, as if it feeds not on death, but on loss without witness. Martyrs unacknowledged, heroes unburied, memories without record. The ecclesiarchy has declared it a false shrine. The Mechanicus fears it as a rogue construct. The Inquisition, they fear it for another reason, because of what it might mean. If the crown is a monument to those forgotten, then someone is building it. Someone, or something, is gathering our dead, not to defile them, not to raise them, but to honor them, not in service to the Emperor, but because no one else will, and if that's true, then the Imperium's greatest shame may not be its cruelty, but its silence. For in a galaxy of endless war, where names are ground into ash and remembered only by the flames that consumed them, the crown of rust floats as a grave marker, a tombstone for the unspoken, and it's still growing. There are no stars in this place, no coordinates, no bearings, no reference points by which a ship or a soul might orient itself. There is only pressure, not physical, not measurable, but present, a sensation that clings to the skin like frost and burns like memory. Some voidfarers have a name for it, a name spoken only once per lifetime, if ever. Whispers on pilgrim decks and midnight barrack prayers call it the deep wake. But to the adeptus astra telepathica, to the rogue navigators who trespass where others refuse, to the inquisitors who chase secrets too long, it is known as the embrace, not a place, a condition, a fate. The embrace isn't found on any map, and it can't be charted like a warp route. It is not a storm or a tide or a rift. It is a moment, a phenomena that happens to a ship in warp transit when the veil grows too thin, when emotion spills too heavy, when the machine's spirit flickers and something behind reality opens its eyes. And when it does, you are no longer traveling through the warp. You are held by it. The first official case, if such a word even applies, was recorded by the explorator vessel Fides Anima in M41.503. En route to deliver salvage from a corrupted hulk near the Palatine Wastes, it vanished during translation. Vanishing is not rare. It's an expected risk. But what happened next was not. 5 months later, Fides Anima reappeared, not translated, manifested. It reformed not at a jump point, but within the gravity well of a dead world in the radial cyst systems, an impossible act, one that should have caused its destruction. But the ship was intact, cold, silent, waiting. The recovery teams found no crew, no blood, no corpses. Just a message etched into the inner walls of the bridge, carved by a hand that must have worked for days, through metal, through paneling, through every surface. The warp does not take, it caresses. It remembers every smile, every cry, every thought unspoken. We were not swallowed. We were seen. The Vox quarters replayed whispers, half-thoughts, fragments of crew voices, not screaming, not panicked, just talking, remembering, asking questions that had no place in the Imperium. Do you remember what Terra smells like? Do you think he loved us before we made him a god? What was my sister's name? They were not hallucinations. The voices were matched to known crew members. Every one of them had served aboard Fide's Anima. All were presumed lost, yet their voices were serene, content, like they chose not to return. It was the first sign of the embrace. Since then, more cases have surfaced, though most are buried under inquisitorial censure. Ships that vanish and reappear, not as wrecks or hulks, but as relics, untouched, preserved, changed. One instance, the lament of Saint Aurelia, a pilgrim barge carrying 3,000 faithful toward the shrine world of Pelagia, entered warp, never arrived, reappeared 12 years later. No crew, no Vox signal, but every surface of the ship was covered in writing, hundreds of thousands of names. None matched any of the known pilgrims aboard. When decoded through cipher chant, the names translated into questions. Each name became a line of inquiry. Philosophy, regret, hope. A pattern emerged. They were the unspoken thoughts of the missing faithful. The embrace had not destroyed them. It had catalogued them. One inquisitor, Sir Velast of the Ordo Astartes, spent a decade researching the embrace, following the pattern of ship disappearances, tracking the drift of memory through psycho dreams and astropathic static. He postulated a heretical but chilling theory, that the warp, while dangerous and monstrous, is not solely a place of chaos and death. It is observation, a mirror of every soul that travels through it. And when a ship is caught in the embrace, it is not attacked. It is held in place long enough to be fully known. To the warp, every thought is a story, and some stories are too beautiful to let go. Velast's final report, logged but never distributed, contained this passage. We are taught the warp is hungry, that it howls with the laughter of demons. But perhaps the laughter is not mockery. Perhaps it is joy. Perhaps we are not prey. Perhaps we are dreams. What else is faith but a story told until it becomes real? Others are not so generous. To the navigator houses, the embrace is death in slow motion. Those who have emerged speak of stars that blink in perfect rhythm, of corridors stretching into impossibility, of doors that lead back to where you started, of reflections in glass that begin smiling before you do. One navigator gouged out his third eye after surviving an embrace event. He described it, in his only coherent statement, as being loved by something that doesn't know what love is, but tries anyway. Another navigator, under sedation, claimed she could still hear her crew talking. Not screaming, talking. Though the ship had burned 2 years ago, most disturbingly, those few vessels recovered from embrace incidents often carry passengers not listed on the manifest. Children. Not feral, not mutated, but impossibly calm, clothed in Imperial vestments, speaking fluent High Gothic, and always asking the same question. Are we home? Some have theorized these are echoes, constructs of memory, shaped by the emotional imprint of the crew. Others believe them to be the warp's attempt at comfort. But to whom? Why would the warp comfort us? The answer, perhaps, is the most terrifying of all, because it wants to be known. The embrace is not malice, it is intimacy. A force so vast, so starless, so unknowable, that it cradles what little we are in its tide, and holds us there, not to destroy us, but to understand us. And like a child gripping a fragile toy, it does not always know when to let go. There are no protocols for the embrace, no defenses, no warning. It can happen to any ship, a moment of grief too heavy, a prayer too honest, a captain too uncertain, a song hummed too softly in the dark, and suddenly the ship is no longer moving forward. It is floating, timeless, weightless, loved. When next you travel the warp and your Geller field flickers, not fails, just flickers, and you feel a warmth behind your thoughts that does not belong to you, do not speak, do not shout, and above all, do not remember. Because the moment you do, the moment the warp feels you looking back, it may decide to keep you. They say the Emperor sees all, that his gaze stretches across the Imperium, through every shrine and sanctum, every battlefield and bastion, that he watches from the golden throne, unblinking, unmoving, eternal. They say his sight is salvation. They say it is judgment. But what happens when he looks away? The final chapter begins not with a battle or a warp breach or the birth of a heresy, but with a silence. It was a data vault technician on Vigilance Station Lambda 23 who first logged it. A nothing, a gap in the fabric of long-range Auspex telemetry, a single unresponsive pixel in a survey field thousands of light-years wide. The tech priest flagged it as a minor equipment failure, no cause for alarm, until it began to move. The anomaly, just a void where there should have been data, traveled through space at impossible speeds, slipping past fortified systems, slipping past entire fleets. Not cloaked, not masked, ignored. Every instrument simply failed to record it. Like it wasn't there, until it was. The first visual was caught by accident, by an astropath sketching blind during a trance. She drew a shape, unwillingly. A circle, not perfect, uneven, surrounded by a corona of smudges. When asked what it meant, she wept and said, "I don't know. I think I was remembering something I never saw." That's how the Inquisition learned of it. That's when the whisper spread, first among data scribes and sensor adepts, and then to those few who trade in truths not meant for daylight. They started calling it the gaze. Not a ship, not a hulk, just a presence, a force, a hole in attention, impossible to look at directly, but impossible not to notice once it had seen you. And once it saw you, something began to change. The reports were inconsistent, but eerily familiar. Navigators complaining of sudden blindness in their third eye, even with Geller fields intact. Vox officers losing memories, specific ones, like they'd been picked clean. An Imperial saint's mural weeping tears of blank paint, the eyes melting into smooth porcelain. And across a dozen systems, statues of the Emperor, carved in reverent detail over centuries, were found with one subtle alteration. No pupils. His eyes had vanished. But the real horror began with the arrival of the Spire Ascendant, a rogue space hulk appearing in the Taloff Rift. It was first detected by an Imperial Navy patrol who mistook it for standard debris. They approached, scanned, detected no warp anomalies. Then the ship spoke, not through Vox, not through code, through vision. Every sensor operator on every vessel that locked onto the hulk saw something, not just a visual, but a memory, their own memory, childhood, battle, confession, sin, a moment they thought was long buried. And above it, watching from behind their own thoughts, was a single golden eye. It didn't blink, it judged. Aboard the command ship Resolute Vigil, Captain Haldis Varen activated emergency purge protocols and attempted to retreat. His ship locked up, life support systems rerouted. Internal sensors turned inward, filming the crew, storing data, mapping every conversation, every step, every breath. And still the eye watched. When the Death Watch arrived, they boarded the hulk under extreme psychic shielding. What they found was not a ship. It was a replica. A cathedral, perfectly rendered in Gothic symmetry, like a miniature of the Imperial Palace's inner sanctum. Golden statues, black marble, winged aquilées, and eyes, everywhere. Every statue bore a face. Every face had open, burning eyes. No mouths, no ears. Just sight, endless, unblinking knowing. And in the center, an altar. Upon it a throne, not ornate, not majestic, just a chair, covered in dust, facing outward, as if waiting. The Death Watch found a single survivor, a sister of silence, lost over a century prior during the vanishing of Sanctus Reach. She bore no wounds. Her skin was intact, her armor pristine, but her mind was fractured. They say she hadn't spoken since she was a child, as is custom for her order. And yet, when she saw the eye in the wall, etched into the obsidian, surrounded by burning script, she whispered, "He stopped looking." And something else started. She died moments later, eyes bleeding gold. What followed was a storm of conflicting doctrine. The Ordo Malleus claimed it to be a psychic residue, a leftover pressure from the Astronomican's vast presence, reshaped by warp feedback and recursive belief. The Adeptus Mechanicus believed it was a null space construct, a psychic anti-reflection, created when the Emperor's will burned too brightly and left an imprint. But the oldest records, the ones kept in vaults behind hexagrammic seals and prayers carved in languages that haven't been spoken since old Earth bled, tell a different story. That the Emperor does not see with just his mind, or his will, or his gene craft. He sees with us. Every believer, every martyr, every dying soul who calls out in faith, every child who lights a candle, every guardsman who clutches a locket, every servant who whispers his name with their final breath. We are his eyes. And when faith falters, when belief becomes bureaucracy, when litanies become rote, when prayers are mouthed but never felt, his vision dims, and something else looks in. The eye is not the warp. It is not chaos. It is not even an enemy. It is a replacement, a force that waits for the watcher to blink, that feeds on doubt, on silence, on the absence of reverence, and it is patient. There are reports now, scattered but growing, of icons defacing themselves, of candles that will not light, of void priests collapsing mid-sermon, clutching their chests and weeping not in pain, but in shame, because they know what is happening. The Emperor's gaze is not omnipotent. It is borrowed from us. And when we stop looking up, he cannot look back. Which brings us to the final, most heretical truth, one the Inquisition would rather die than confirm. The eye is not closing in. It is already here, watching from statues, from cogitator screens, from the reflection of a bolter's surface. Not judging like the Emperor with love and fury, but with cold curiosity. Not asking, "Are you worthy?" but asking, "Are you mine yet?" So if one day aboard your ship in the dead of the void, you pass a shrine, just a small one, a corner candelabra, or a makeshift acola carved into steel, and it feels cold, look at it, kneel, pray. Not because you're told to, because someone else wants to see through you, and the only way to shut that eye is to make sure the Emperor still has yours.